everyone, this is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com, and today I'm bringing to you another In My Opinion video where you guys get to ask me whatever kind of question that you like. So you guys can just, ask me anything and just pick my brain and see what falls out. So I got this question from TechDave99 on one of my previous In My Opinion videos, and he says, "Hi Steve, like your videos. What would you like to be the future of Access? I would like to see VBA go away and use VB and C#. I think Roslyn could handle backwards compatibility. Also, Access could easily be used as a front end for SQL services like Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQL, etc. It would be great for it to use those as a default. Better multi-user experience would be great." So first of all, Dave, thank you very much for the kind words and for giving me your question. I really appreciate it. These videos are not possible unless you guys ask me questions. So please don't hesitate to drop me a comment in the comment section below and ask your questions there. Or you can also reach me at Facebook by going to Programming Made Easy. That's Programming Made EZ. On Facebook. I guess if you're in Canada or Great Britain, it would be Programming Made EZ. So it's a little different for you guys, I suppose. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Dave's question here. Before we can get into the future of Access, let's talk real briefly about the past of Access and about how it kind of got to where it's at. So Access was originally designed to be a direct competitor to some of the database technologies of the day back in the 80s, like DBase. DBase was a very popular database solution back then. And Access was going to be the competitor. It was going to be the big, Microsoft-backed competitor database-wise. But there were some problems making it work. There were some problems getting the coding structure, the macros together that were going to be behind Access. And so the technology really didn't get formed very well. It didn't really kind of come into its own until around Access 97 and Access 2000. But around that time is also when Microsoft acquired FoxPro. And FoxPro was essentially a direct competitor to Access. It did basically the same things that Access does. It had the reports and the tables and that sort of stuff. So you had in Microsoft two direct competitors to one another, right? You had Access and you had FoxPro. And initially, it was thought that these two different departments, these two technologies were going to be merged together into one really nice technology to bring forms, reports, queries, tables, that sort of thing. But instead, Microsoft chose to do something that they are renowned for doing in the corporate environment. And that was, rather than merging the two technologies, they would have them competing in parallel forms. So you had the FoxPro team developing FoxPro, you had the Access team developing Access, and never should the twain meet, right? Never should those two technologies cross over. So in a way, this kind of makes sense. If you think about, it's very popular. It's a very popular theme in American history, really, that competition breeds better products. So it was part of Microsoft's culture to have competition, even amongst teams that might be working on similar projects. And this goes, this is a very Microsoft is well known for doing this with a lot of different products, even all the way up to Link to SQL and Entity Framework. Link to SQL was a very similar technology to Entity Framework, and Entity Framework and Link to SQL were direct competition with each other. And sure, they probably worked under the same roof. Some of them worked in different areas of the United States, but essentially they were all under the Microsoft name brand. And there might have been some camaraderie between them, but really those two teams were working against each other. They were trying to make their product the one that Microsoft would eventually go with. And Entity Framework ended up winning out that particular competition. But back in the day, we had FoxPro and Access. And right around 2007, when Office 2007 was released, just happens to coincide with about the same time that Fox Pro support was dropped. Fox Pro 2000, I believe it was 2006, was when Microsoft stopped supporting Fox Pro. So you have the dropping of Fox Pro in around 2006. You have Office 2007, which gets released. And Office 2007 brought about some significant changes to Office, and especially Access. Now, instead of a menu system, you had ribbons, right? You have the ribbons, which a lot of people still to this day absolutely despise the ribbons. And I honestly, I can't blame them. I kind of preferred the menu system. I don't really like the ribbons as much. But as far as Microsoft was concerned, it gave them more flexibility. And there are some neat things that you can do with ribbons. You can do a lot of neat little icons and tricks and things with the ribbon. But unless you really get into the XML and know how to use that as a tool, it's very difficult to use. And Microsoft didn't really release a lot of great material about how to create ribbons. They just kind of have at it, have fun. Here's this new technology. We're not going to really tell you much about it, but there it is. Have fun at it. And it's been kind of a problem, obviously, with Office for a while. But right around 2007 also came the 64-bit architecture and the ACE engine. So we got better capabilities with Access. We got the ability to support in some environments the 64-bit environment instead of 32-bit all the time. And this was a pretty large advancement in the technology for Access. So this really brought about a bit of a new revolution in Access. There were a few more people that came to Access as a solution for their products. And it was kind of a kick in the pants that Access needed in order to continue in the marketplace. But you have to understand that by this time, Access was now seen as a power user tool. It was not a development environment. It's not even a database. It's not even a relational database management system in the eyes of most people. So it's not for DBAs. It's not for database administrators. It's not for coders. It's meant for these quote unquote power users. And who is the typical power user? Well, a power user is essentially somebody who would be like lower to middle management, maybe even upper management, but some sort of management role typically, who needs to take some information about their department or about their company and bring it together in some sort of simple way to consume. Create a report about, inventory or stock, or maybe write up an invoice if you're a small business solution, right? If you're a small business and you need something to write invoices, you could do that. But if I want to take a look at sales numbers, I can go to the data tables directly and look at the data, or I can write a query to get the data that I want. And these power users were not your average, person that's just going to be using Excel to keep track of list items, or be using Word to just do, regular like resumes or creating some sort of template for Office memos or something like that. A power user is somebody who has better comprehension of how to utilize a computer and how to utilize data to create some business metrics and to use those business metrics internally within their management team or somehow within the business. So a step above basically somebody that's just basically using Office for typical Office needs. Now, that means that Access is filling in this very niche role. It's not a developer environment, so your typical .NET developers or PHP or Java or Ruby developers, what have you, they're not looking to Access as a solution for an enterprise level solution. Your database administrators, they've got better products to work with. They've got Microsoft SQL Server, which comes with reporting services and analysis services and integration services. They've got, Oracle databases they can work with. They've got MySQL. They've got PostgreSQL. They've got a whole bunch of other technologies, and most of them are even free. Why would I go to Access, which I have to pay for? It's going to give me smaller space, right? Because you only have like a 2 gig limit on how big your databases can get. Whereas these other technologies, even the free versions of MySQL and MS SQL Server Express, you could do, like 10 gigs or more of free storage. Why would I pay for access when I could just use one of these free alternatives that's more robust and does more things and has more tools? So DBAs don't see it as a solution. Coders don't see it as a solution. It only fills in this small little role for power users. And that meant that Microsoft, as a company focused on development and focused on trying to make money in the development world, since none of their developers, none of their people who are looking towards the future are seeing Access as a solution, because, like I said, the original thing was Microsoft was supposed to compete in the relational database space, but now they have Microsoft SQL Server. So why do they need to push Access as a solution? So Microsoft kind of said, we're not really going to do anything with Access. We'll still bundle it because we know there's all our power users that are out there that still use it and still want it. And they've got their databases that they want to maintain, and they want to keep going with that. But it doesn't have a .NET backend, so it can't tie in with any of the .NET development stuff that we've been working with. It doesn't, it works well with Microsoft SQL Server, but the database itself doesn't work well with anybody, really. Access databases are kind of hard to you can get drivers to work with them, but typically, you're working with a file on a disk somewhere. That's not a relational database server. That's just a file that gets opened up and worked with. So as far as the development team, as far as Microsoft is concerned, this is not a direction that anybody is going to be going in the future. So essentially from 2007, when you have the advent of the ribbon and the ACE engine and all that good stuff and 64-bit environments, all the way up to now 2016, you don't really have anything new introduced. There's nothing major that's been coming out with the major versions of Access. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at the major versions of things like .NET or PHP, a major version release means there's some pretty big features being added to the application. Whereas in Access, they were doing the complete opposite. They were taking stuff away, right? They took away the menu system in 2007. They took away ADP, which is something I'll talk about here in just a little bit, as part of another part of what Dave's question was. They're taking away features that us as developers in Access really like, which is really kind of, it's puzzling in a lot of ways. If you have a major release, you should be adding more features, not taking stuff away. So it kind of shows the direction that Microsoft has seen Access as going. And I think that's why for a long time now, Access developers have foretold the demise of Access as a solution. They think it's just going to go away. We pretty much have come to accept or expect that sometime, we don't know when, Microsoft is just going to drop Access. Now, when that happens and how that happens is obviously up for a lot of speculation. I happen to think that it's probably going to happen when Microsoft goes full-on web and full-on cloud solution, which we're kind of already seeing them do with Office 365. I think once they jump into no more desktop version of Office, period, when they get to that particular point, I think they're just going to drop Access as a solution altogether. They may still maintain some, some sort of backwards compatibility support for it, but probably not in any new versions of Access. They're just going to say, sorry, we're done with Access. If you want something, you're going to have to go to .NET. So I think that's probably the direction that they're going to go with Access. I don't think, based upon how little change we've seen over the last decade in Access, there's probably not going to be any major significant changes. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't make some changes. And some of the things that Dave brings up are really good suggestions. And I personally would like to see some of these things happen too. For example, he says, we'd like to see them drop VBA and go to VB.NET or C#. Just go to .NET in general. And I don't think that this would be too difficult. And there's a lot of positives that could come from doing this. So if they took these Access classes and all, you have to understand, if they get rid of VBA behind Access, they're going to have to get rid of VBA through all of Office, okay? Because Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, they all have a VBA backend to them. Okay, you can do coding with VBA behind all those different technologies. So if they're going to drop VBA in Access, they're also going to have to drop it throughout all of Office. Now, if that's what they're going to do, then they're going to need to build .NET classes to do all of the same things. They're going to have to basically do almost a like-for-like class development in the .NET framework to match what's already in VBA. So, could they do that? Yeah, and there would be some great benefits to doing that. I mean, think about it. If I, as a power user, made a small little application for myself, and my boss saw me use this and says, wow, that's a great application. I would love for our developers to implement that solution enterprise-wide. Well, if I'm already building that Access application with a .NET class structure behind it, the developer doesn't have to do this whole reinterpretation of the application and recreate it in .NET. They can just take that .NET code base that's already been built with Access and just expand upon it in the .NET architecture. That's very possible. That's very doable as long as there is this conversion of Access from VBA to some sort of .NET language. So I think that would be absolutely fantastic. And from another perspective, that power user would essentially be learning development skills very specific to the .NET framework. So they could carry over some of those skills from what they've learned in Access to some of the other .NET architectures. So you essentially could have Access as almost like a Win32 replacement or alternative, right? Win32 forms, they're nice. They're pretty much done with, they're still being supported by Microsoft, but there's no future development for it. And I think that's essentially the same outlook that they could have with Access once they go to .NET. Look, you don't need to do a whole ton of new development for Access. Just bring over what's currently in a VBA COM edition and pull it over to the .NET side. And once you do that, now you can bring it over and pull it inside of the .NET fold. Now, I guess there's probably a problem with that in that how is Microsoft then going to bundle that, which, .NET is a free architecture. How are you going to make people pay for Access if .NET is already free? I think they could still do that. You just basically make, sort of like how they sold Visual Studio, right? They still sell Visual Studio. Why couldn't you do that with Access? You can still sell it essentially as a simplified or dumbed down version of Visual Studio. I think that's very possible. It's a great direction I think that they could go, and I'm sure that they could still continue to make a good deal of money marketing to the quote-unquote power user to have like a Visual Studio Lite edition that is essentially Access. I think that would be terrific. Now, do I think Microsoft's going to do that? No. I don't think that they're going to do that. And it's too bad. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunity. And maybe there's some slight chance that somebody, that's in the Microsoft, that's in the Microsoft offices watches this video because it comes up while they're randomly browsing YouTube for, cat lols. And they decide, what's this thing that this Steve guy says about Access? I doubt that I'm going to influence any sort of change to do that direction, but if one of them just happens to come across this video and says, oh, you know what, that's actually a pretty good idea, I think the community at large would welcome it with major open arms. It would be a huge boon to those of us who are Access developers, because now you've got all these people. Let me just take a step back here on what I'm about to say here. If you make the conversion from VBA to .NET, you have to understand that this means that all previous support for VBA is essentially cut off, okay? Because they're two basically incompatible technologies, right? You can't really make them work together. So if they were to release Access 2020 as a .NET version of this, to do the support for backwards compatibility of all the older editions, 2016 and older, I don't think that Microsoft could really pursue that because you can't really make .NET work with the VBA COM. And I don't think Roslyn is the solution either. Now, for those of you who don't know what Roslyn is, it's the compiler. It's an open source compiler that eventually got mixed into the fold for Visual Studio to create .NET applications and compile the C# and the VB.NET and F# and all these other different languages and compile them into the .NET language. Now, could they do that with VBA and make Roslyn do that? Sure, they might be able to do that, but honestly, again, we're talking about a technology that nobody really particularly thinks is a first-class citizen in the development or the DBA realm. So why would the folks over at Roslyn take a look at VBA and say, oh yeah, let's bring that into the mix. Let's bring a dying technology and build it into our system. There isn't really a lot of incentive to do that. They want to look for those budgeting new types of coding languages and bring them into the fold to create .NET applications with it. So going back to my original point then, that means quite a bit of new work for us Access developers, because now we have all these clients that use Access, right? All these managers and stuff that use Access applications, and they need someone to help them do the conversion from Access 2016 to 2020. They're going to need somebody like us developers who know what's going on, to do that conversion from the old to the new. That would be a huge boost to a very big demographic of developers. And it would also probably open up the eyes of some of the developers that are out there that only explicitly work in .NET. Because now they could build those .NET applications using some of the Access forms. They could use the reporting facility of Access. They could write queries or do whatever with Access objects. And they'd find it perhaps a little simpler to use than some of the other objects like ADO.NET. And you know, now they start to go, oh, well, you know what? I kind of like some of this stuff that we can do in Access. And I think it would definitely be a boon to Access if they were to do that, both in terms of the power user who's using Access, the Access developer like me who likes Access and would love to see it go to .NET. It means work for me to do some of the software conversions, and it also means I have a more robust backend that I can do bigger and better things with Access with it now. And then even from the regular .NET developer, they're able to bring in some of those components that are really nice to use in Access and start bringing them to the .NET world. So I would love to see that. I don't know if there's something technical about the logistics of doing that I'm just not accounting for, and Microsoft, as you know, does know about, and they're just like, that Steve guy, he has no idea what's going on. So anyway, that's enough about that particular perspective, I think. I think I've pretty much expanded on that pretty well. Now, going to Dave's other topic about, Access be used as a front end to one of those other database management systems like Microsoft SQL Server or PostgreSQL. The problem is, I agree with you. I absolutely 100% agree with you. I would love Access to be just the front end. Do my reports, do my forms. I don't need anything else. Just give me some of the VBA scripting on top of it, right? Forms, reports, VBA scripting, I'm happy. The problem is, they already did that, and they already got rid of it. There was an ADP file that you could make, which did exactly that, where you just had reports, you just had forms, and you could write VBA code, and you could connect to these SQL servers, and you could just use those SQL servers as your backend data structure. And you didn't use the ACE engine, you didn't use the Jet engine for any of this. You just talked directly to the SQL server and built your UI on Access. After, in 2013, in Access 2013, they just dropped support for ADP for no reason. And it left a lot of us developers in Access bewildered because we loved this capability. I was planning on doing a lot of moving into the ADP direction. I had a lot of people coming to me with databases, and they were written in Access with Access table structures in the back end. And I'm constantly, almost one of the first things that I assess with any Access database that comes to me is, what are you using for a backend? Should you go to Microsoft SQL Server? And almost, 90% of the time, the answer is yes, they need to go to SQL Server. And here, ADP was the perfect solution. It was the perfect ideal way of still maintaining Access as a development environment while using SQL Server as a backend. And it was a not too difficult of a conversion to go from their current database to this ADP. Now, why Microsoft got rid of it, nobody knows. And it's another one of those things where, us Access developers feel very slighted because there's some great things that have been introduced into Access over the years that just simply get torn out for no other reason than Microsoft said make it so. And a lot of us are very upset about that because I know a lot of people, a lot of developers that loved ADP and loved that capability of Access, and having it gone is just simply a shame. Microsoft should really reconsider that policy, but I don't think that they will. I think that they made that decision for some sort of reason, and that's just the way it works. And I'm sure that there probably was some sort of internal reason and internal discussion about it and why they dropped it. But if you know what the answer is to that, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to have an open discussion about that because there are a lot of Access developers that are just really upset with Microsoft since 2010. That was the last version where you could do ADP. We're really upset with why did Microsoft just drop one of the most useful features that they've introduced to Access in a very long time, and they just drop it for no reason. No reason given, they just decided to end it. So let's get to the bigger part of his question, I guess, and that is, what do I want the future of Access to be? And in a way, also, I kind of want to talk about what I think is going to happen. I think Microsoft Access is going to go away, like I said, as a technology. I think it's going to go away when Microsoft goes full on web application, where all of your Office documents, your Excel spreadsheets, your Word documents, your Outlook email, everything is going to be web cloud based, and they just drop desktop versions of these things. Now, maybe they won't drop desktop. Maybe they'll continue, with the desktop versions of these applications. But I think that Microsoft has essentially kind of, if you look over the last several generations of Office, you see that there hasn't really been a great move in Office to do anything special or bring about any special new features with those with the desktop applications. The direction that they're clearly moving is web. They want web versions of these pieces of software. And from a Microsoft perspective, this makes a lot of sense because all they have to do is just have servers that are up in the cloud that host these applications, and they don't have to try to keep track of forgeries and bootlegs and stuff like that with Office. So that's one component. And another is whenever they want to make a change or an adjustment or an update to Office, they just simply post it up on their servers. And this is the same consideration that businesses go through all the time when they're trying to determine whether or not they want to go to a ASP.NET application or a PHP application or a Ruby application or a Java application over a desktop application. Okay, they want web because it's easier to manage and maintain and update. So Microsoft is looking at this the same way. And you can see they're pushing a lot on Azure because they make a lot of money doing Azure. I think that's where Microsoft sees the company making its money in the future, is using Azure and using Office 365 and doing everything in the cloud and cloud storage and that sort of thing. I think they're kind of moving away from the desktop applications as a form of making money, as a business plan. So, with that in mind, I think that Microsoft Access at some point in the future is just going to die on the vine. It's entirely possible that if Microsoft decides to continue with Access, or I should say continue with making desktop applications, there might be some sort of alternative to Access that gets created, and it would come from the .NET realm. We've seen a similar type of technology in Microsoft, in Light Switch. I don't know if some of you have ever heard of Light Switch, but it was a small little project that came about in 2012, 2013, where you could create an application that was based upon .NET that worked with tables, and you could, very simply make forms. And it was a very simple little interface. It wasn't as simple as Access, but relatively speaking, it was simple to design your applications. And they worked both in desktop environments and on the web. So you could basically build one application for both environments. And it really kind of was looking like it might be a competitor or some sort of replacement to Access. And in fact, if you look on some message boards and look on some of the suggested alternatives to Access, LightSwitch comes up as one of the potential solutions. Now, LightSwitch didn't really take off, and I think in large part that's because Silverlight didn't really take off. But it just goes to show that there is the potential, and Microsoft has been thinking about this particular space where we want a simpler solution. And in fact, LightSwitch was even marketed again to the power user. That was how LightSwitch was marketed, was to the power user, the same target audience as was being targeted for Access. So Microsoft is still looking at this power user group of people and saying, how can we appeal to them but get out of Office? And I think that they really do. I think that they want to get out of Office as far as a desktop solution. And I think that they would like to see either a .NET solution that is similar to Office take root, which I think is essentially what 365 is turning into. Or they get some sort of desktop edition of a .NET application that substitutes maybe each one of these components. So maybe you get a .NET version of Word, you get a .NET version of Access, you get a .NET version of PowerPoint, and maybe they're all sold marketed separately, so that you can get just those particular products you want. And then they continue on with the 365 solutions for the other stuff like Outlook and Excel and Word, that sort of thing. But maybe if you really, really want a desktop version of something like it, you can get the desktop edition of something like it, but it's been built in .NET, in the .NET library as opposed to some COM library that's for Office. So that's where I think the direction of it's probably going to go. I would love to see, like I said before, I'd love to see them just simply make an exact imitation of Access, but do it in .NET. That would make the world a heck of a lot easier for everybody involved if they just did that and put in the work and put in the resource to do it. I think that it would be a huge boon to the Access development community. It'd be a huge boon to Access as an IDE, and could possibly become maybe not a first-class citizen in the development world, but it would be a second-class citizen. I think it would definitely become a very widely accepted solution as opposed to the situation that it's currently in. So anyway, there you guys go. I hope that I've answered all your questions, Dave. I hope that I've done so in a satisfactory way. If you don't think that it was satisfactory and you think, oh God, that Steve guy, he just didn't answer my question the way I wanted him to, or you have some sort of disagreement, again, please feel free to drop me a comment in the comment section below that, and I'm sure I'll come up with some wonderful retort. And again, if you guys have any questions at all, and it doesn't even have to be technology related, it doesn't have to be software development related, it can be personal life or politics. I always bring up politics. I'm a politics guy. But if you just want to talk about science or geology or whatever, feel free to just, like I said, go to the comment section below this video and ask that question, because I can't continue making these videos until you guys ask me the questions. It just works that way. I have no questions to answer, I can't make any more of the videos. So please drop me a line in the comment section below this video and I'll be happy to answer it for you. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you guys at the next video. And until then, thank you so much for watching this one.